Fearful avoidants don't fear love, they fear the pain that comes with it. And until you understand their wounds, you'll misunderstand their behavior. Fearful avoidants grew up learning that love brings both comfort and pain, often from the very same people. It's the kind of emotional blueprint that shapes someone long before they ever understand what attachment even is. When your nervous system learns early on that affection can turn into withdrawal or that safety can flip into chaos without warning, your instinct becomes survival, not closeness, not trust. Survive. So for the fearful avoidant, intimacy becomes a double-edged sword, something they crave but don't fully believe they can rely on. They feel a pull toward connection, yet an equally strong urge to protect themselves from what connection might cost. That's why their instinct becomes quietly tragic. Get close, but not too close. They're not indecisive. They're not playing games. They're bracing for impact, because history has taught them that getting attached often precedes getting hurt. Their heart wants connection deeply, intensely, wholeheartedly, but their body braces as if closeness is a threat. Every step forward feels like stepping onto thin ice, where even a warm moment has the potential to crack beneath them. So they move carefully, slowly, hesitantly, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. Their emotional system is wired to anticipate danger, even in safe moments, scanning constantly for signs of inconsistency, rejection, or sudden shifts. And when they sense even the slightest change, a delayed text, a different tone, a moment of emotional distance, their inner alarms start ringing. Not because they assume the worst about you, but because their past has conditioned them to believe that love can vanish without warning. This is why fearful avoidants live in a painful paradox. They long for closeness, yet fear the vulnerability it requires. They want reassurance, yet instinctively push away the very people who offer it. They crave stability, yet often choose emotional distance because it feels safer than risking disappointment. To love for them is to voluntarily walk towards something they've learned can burn them. And still they walk, but each step is cautious, controlled, guard. Their body stays tense even when their heart is open, prepared to retreat if anything feels overwhelming or unpredictable. And here lies the real wound. They don't fear love itself. They fear what love might turn into. They fear losing themselves. They fear being abandoned once they finally let their guard down. They fear repeating old emotional injuries they never had the tools to heal. So they hold back, not to punish you, but to protect themselves from the pain their nervous system remembers too vividly. Behind every hesitation is a history. Behind every retreat is a trigger. Behind every mixed signal is a heart that wants to trust, but learned long ago. That trust can be dangerous. Their core wound is simple, but devastating. If I open up, I might lose everything. If I don't, I might lose you. The push-pull pattern of a fearful avoidant is one of the most misunderstood emotional dynamics in relationships. From the outside, it looks like mixed signals. It looks like confusion, inconsistency, or emotional unpredictability. But inside their mind, it's nothing like that. There is no confusion. There is no indecision. What looks like chaos on the surface is actually survival strategy running quietly beneath every interaction. Fearful avoidants carry two opposing fears that collide every time someone gets close: the fear of being abandoned and the fear of being consumed. Both fears hold equal power, and both feel equally real. So when they lean in, it's because their heart wants connection. When they pull back, it's because their nervous system screams that they're getting too exposed, too vulnerable, too emotionally naked. They're not unsure about you. They're unsure about safety. This inner conflict creates emotional whiplash that they rarely explain out loud. One part of them says, let this person in. Another part says, protect yourself before it's too late. And because both voices feel true, they shift between closeness and distance without ever fully meaning to. When they feel warmth, they soften. When they feel intensity, they retreat. When you show affection, it lights up the part of them that longs for connection. But when that affection becomes consistent or deep, their survival instincts flare, warning them that vulnerability has consequences. Not because of you, but because of the emotional blueprint they were given long before you arrived. This is the real truth. Their push-pull isn't a sign that they don't care. It's a sign that they care so deeply that it scares them. If they didn't feel anything, there would be no conflict, no tension, no internal tug of war. They would simply detach and move on. But when a fearful avoidant pushes and pulls, it's because they're fighting a battle between desire and danger, hope and fear, connection and self protection. Their heart leans toward you, but their past forces them to remain cautious. Every time they pull back, they're not rejecting you. They're trying to regulate the overwhelming intensity of what they feel. Every time they return, it's because the bond is stronger than their fear. This cycle becomes exhausting for them, even though they'll rarely admit it. They don't enjoy retreating. They don't enjoy feeling overwhelmed. They don't enjoy confusing the people they care about. But they feel trapped inside a nervous system that hasn't learned how to stay when closeness feels threatening. To love a fearful avoidant is to understand that their push-pull isn't a character flaw. It isn't manipulation. It isn't emotional immaturity. It's a defense mechanism shaped by years of unpredictable connection. They're not pushing you away. They're shielding themselves from the terror of losing you once they finally let their walls fall. Their behavior isn't a lack of affection. It's the clearest sign of how deeply they do feel. Their pattern isn't confusion. It's protection disguised as distance. One of the most painful truths about fearful avoidance is their hyper-awareness of rejection. They don't just notice the shifts in someone's behavior, they feel them on a nervous system level. It's like their body is constantly scanning for signs that someone is pulling away, even when nothing is actually wrong. A delayed reply, a shorter message, a slightly different tone, or even a moment where you seem distracted. These tiny cues hit them like alarms. Their mind immediately jumps to the worst outcome. Something's changed. I'm losing them. This isn't dramatization. This isn't insecurity for attention. This is their emotional wiring responding exactly the way it was trained to. When you grow up never knowing when affection might disappear, your instincts learn to detect the earliest signs of distance, even when the distance isn't real. For a fearful avoidant, rejection doesn't begin when someone leaves. Rejection begins in the subtle shifts that other people wouldn't even notice. Their nervous system is always preparing for the moment connection might slip away. Even when things are good, stable, or warm, part of them is already bracing for the possibility of loss. It's not pessimism, it's protection. They've lived through emotional inconsistency before, and their mind believes it's safer to anticipate pain than be blindsided by it again. So when they sense any micro change, their survival instincts activate instantly. Withdrawal, shutting down, emotional distancing, or bracing themselves behind a silent wall. Not because they want to disconnect, but because they fear the heartbreak that closeness makes possible. And this hyper-awareness doesn't just hurt them emotionally, it exhausts them. It creates a cycle where they monitor every interaction, second guess every text, reread conversations for hidden meanings, and replay moments, trying to analyze what went wrong. Even when nothing has their relationship with connection becomes fragile, not because the connection is fragile, but because their inner world expects instability. They look for signs of rejection the same way someone else might look for signs of affection. Their focus is trained on what might go wrong, what might be changing, what might be slipping through their fingers. And the tragic part is the more they fear losing someone, the more their anxiety pushes them to pull back first, creating the very outcome they wish to avoid. But here's the real heartbreaking truth. When a fearful avoidant overreacts to small shifts, it's not you they're reacting to, it's their history. It's every moment they trusted someone who suddenly became distant. It's every time they cared deeply and paid the price for it. The weight they feel in their chest isn't coming from the present moment, it's the past coming alive again. They're not imagining rejection because they want to be dramatic. They're imagining rejection because their nervous system has survived it too many times. And still, deep down, they wish they didn't think this way. They wish they could relax into connection without scanning for signs of danger. They wish they could believe that this time is different. But their mind is always watching, always analyzing, always preparing for loss. For a fearful avoidant, rejection isn't a moment. It's a fear that lives in every moment of closeness. At the core of every fearful avoidant lies a wound that cuts in two opposite directions. It tells them they are too much, and not enough at the very same time. This contradiction shapes everything: their relationships, their self worth, their patterns, and the way they love. They fear that their emotions, needs, and intensity will overwhelm the people they care about. Yet, at the same time, they fear that who they are isn't meaningful enough to keep anyone close. It's a painful duality that leaves them constantly questioning themselves: am I asking for too much? Followed by, am I even worth holding on to? These thoughts aren't logical. They're emotional scars left behind from early relationships where love was inconsistent, unpredictable, or conditional. When affection came with strings, conditions, or sudden shifts, their mind learned a disturbing lesson: if I show too much, I'll scare them away. If I show too little, I'll be forgotten. This deep internal conflict makes every relationship feel like walking on emotional tightrope. When they express need, vulnerability, or desire, guilt hits them immediately. Was that too much? Did I say too much? Did I need too much? But when they hold back, protect themselves, or retreat, another fear rises. What if they think, I don't care? What if silence makes me lose them? They're stuck between the terror of being abandoned and the terror of being a burden. And the tragedy is that both fears feel equally real, both feel equally possible. So they never fully relax into connection, even when they want to. Their mind stays hyper aware, trying to manage how they show up, how much they reveal, and how much they hide, constantly trying to find the right amount of themselves that won't push someone away. But here's the truth: they'll rarely admit out loud, fearful avoidants experience emotions more deeply than people realize. They feel love intensely. They feel fear intensely. They feel connection intensely. And because of that intensity, they worry that their emotional depth might be too much for someone else to handle. So they filter themselves, hold back, edit their reactions, suppress the pieces of themselves that feel big. They want to be chosen, but they're scared to be fully seen. They want to be loved, but they fear that their real self is either overwhelming or disappointing. This emotional tug of war makes them question their worth, even in healthy relationships, even when someone is showing up consistently. And yet, their fear of not being enough cuts just as deeply. They fear that their quiet moments, their need for space, their cautious heart, and their protective walls might make them seem cold or uninterested. They fear that the very survival strategies that once protected them are now the things that might push someone away. It's a brutal paradox. They're terrified of giving too much and terrified of giving too little. So they remain in the middle, always hesitating, always analyzing, always wondering which version of themselves is the right one to keep someone close. This wound creates a silent ache inside them, a belief that they have to be careful simply existing. They question their value not because they lack it, but because they were never taught how to feel safe being their full self. Their deepest wound isn't neediness, it isn't insecurity. It's the belief that loving them requires effort others won't be willing to give. Fearful avoidants carry emotional pain in a way that few people ever truly see. On the surface, they may seem composed, detached, or even unaffected, but inside, they hold on to hurt far longer than they will ever admit. They replay moments in their mind long after everyone else has moved on. They revisit conversations, questions, misunderstandings, and silences, trying to decode what went wrong or what they should have done differently. Even when they appear to shrug something off, their nervous system holds on to the emotional imprint. They feel deeply but privately, quietly, internally. It's not that they're unwilling to express their pain, it's that they're terrified of what might happen if they do. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Emotional openness feels like a spotlight they were never allowed to stand under. So instead of reaching out, they retreat into their own thoughts, carrying hurt like a secret weight that no one knows they're struggling to lift. The most heartbreaking part is that fearful avoidants don't process pain in a straight line. It comes in waves. They seem fine one moment, then something small, a tone, a memory, a familiar pattern, brings the pain back up, like it just happened. They can go weeks without thinking about someone, then suddenly feel a rush of unresolved emotion that hits with full force. Their heart keeps records, their mind wishes it could erase. Old wounds resurface easily, especially when a current situation resembles something from their past. They hold on to emotional pain, not because they're dramatic or unwilling to heal, but because their nervous system hasn't learned how to fully let go. Pain becomes a familiar companion, something they understand better than the unknown territory of emotional safety. This is why they can revisit relationships long after they've ended, not physically, but mentally. They scroll through old messages, replay old conversations, reread the last exchange, analyze the turning point, and wonder if staying distant protected them or cost them something meaningful. Their mind loops through unfinished emotional business. Even when the world thinks they've moved on, they break quietly, not loudly, and because they don't show the depth of their inner turmoil, people assume they're unaffected, unbothered, or emotionally removed. But beneath that stillness, they're processing everything, every shift, every wound, every moment that made them feel not chosen, not safe, or not enough. Fearful avoidants also internalize guilt more deeply than anyone realizes. They don't just hold on to the pain others caused them, they hold on to the pain they believe they caused others. Even small moments where they pulled away, shut down, or said something defensive can haunt them long afterward. They replay their own actions with the same intensity, wondering if they pushed someone too far, shut someone out too abruptly, or hurt someone unintentionally. Their self-protective behaviors become another source of pain, creating a cycle where they not only fear emotional wounds, but blame themselves for causing them. They hold on to pain because letting go feels risky, because healing requires vulnerability, because releasing the past means trusting the present and trusting themselves. A fearful avoidance silence is never empty. It's filled with everything they're trying to carry alone. For a fearful avoidant, emotional triggers don't feel like discomfort. They feel like danger. Their nervous system reacts faster than their mind can interpret what's actually happening. A sudden shift in someone's tone, a pause in conversation, an unexpected moment of closeness, or even their own rising feelings can send a surge of emotion through their body that feels overwhelming, destabilizing, and impossible to control. This is the emotional spike, a rush of fear, panic, protectiveness, or withdrawal that hits them before they've even had a chance to make sense of the moment. And because the spike feels instinctive and urgent, it convinces them that they have to act quickly, shut down, pull back, detach, avoid, retreat. But what they don't realize in the moment is that this reaction is not about the present, it's about the past replaying itself inside their body. Slowing the emotional spike is the first step toward healing because it interrupts the automatic loop between fear and withdrawal. Fearful avoidants often think their reactions are logical, but most of their emotional responses come from old experiences their nervous system hasn't let go of. Their body reacts as if they're still in environments where closeness meant chaos or where expressing needs meant rejection. So when something triggers them, the spike feels like a warning: protect yourself now before you get hurt. This reaction happens so fast that it feels like truth. But healing begins with recognizing that the spike isn't truth, it's memory, it's trauma echoing. It's old emotional pain trying to protect them by recreating the same defenses that once kept them safe. To slow the emotional spike, a fearful avoidant has to learn something they were never taught: how to pause, not pull away, not run. Just pause. When the trigger hits, whether it's fear of abandonment or fear of engulfment, a moment of grounding can completely change the outcome. A slow breath, a quiet internal reminder this feeling isn't the whole story. A moment of awareness that says, wait, I don't have to react yet. This pause creates a small gap where clarity can enter, where they can ask themselves what they're actually afraid of, what they're interpreting, and whether they're responding to reality or to their past. This space is where healing becomes possible. Slowing the spike doesn't mean the fear disappears. It means the fear no longer controls the reaction. It means the avoidant can choose connection instead of retreat. It means they can communicate instead of shutting down. It means they can stay present without assuming danger. For someone with a fearful avoidant attachment, this is revolutionary. It's the moment where survival mode loosens its grip and they realize they're not in danger, they're in discomfort, and discomfort can be survived without abandoning themselves or the person they care about. When they slow the emotional spike, something beautiful happens. Their fear becomes manageable, their reactions become intentional, and their relationships stop feeling like threats. Slowing the spike is more than a technique. It's the first step toward finally feeling safe in love. One of the biggest misconceptions about healing, fearful avoidance, is the idea that they need more closeness, more reassurance, more emotional intensity. But that's not what their nervous system responds to. What they truly need is safe connection, not constant connection. Safe connection is slow, predictable, grounded, and emotionally steady. The one thing their nervous system never learned how to trust, constant connection, overwhelms them. Safe connection regulates them. Constant closeness feels like pressure. Safe closeness feels like space to breathe. Constant emotional availability can trigger their fear of being consumed, smothered, or lost within someone else's needs. But safe availability, calm check-ins, consistent warmth, gentle presence gives their nervous system something it has rarely had, a relational pattern that doesn't shift unpredictably. Fearful avoidants aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of the intensity and unpredictability they associate with love. So when someone comes on too strong, pushes for immediate emotional intimacy, or demands consistent closeness without room for breathing, their instinctive reaction is to pull back. Not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much all at once. Their system needs time to absorb emotional connection. They need pacing. They need quiet moments to recalibrate. They need to know that closeness doesn't mean losing themselves, and distance doesn't mean losing the relationship. Safe connection provides exactly that. The steady reassurance that they can come close without disappearing and step back without being abandoned. This is why predictability matters more to fearful avoidance than intensity. Words matter less than patterns. Grand gestures mean less than consistent behavior. Passion means less than stability. They don't trust feelings that spike quickly. They trust feelings that grow slowly. Safe connection teaches them over time that emotional intimacy doesn't have to be explosive or overwhelming. It can be calm, reliable, and sustainable. Safe connection gives them a model of love that doesn't trigger their alarm system. It teaches their body that closeness won't erupt into chaos, conflict, or emotional punishment. It shows their heart that love can be felt without. To truly heal, a fearful avoidant must practice giving and receiving connection in small, controlled doses. This means checking in without pressure, opening up one layer at a time instead of all at once, asking for reassurance without feeling guilty, expressing discomfort without shutting down, offering vulnerability in moments where safety is clear, and slowly their nervous system begins to rewrite its expectations. Closeness is not danger. Closeness is comfort. Closeness is steady. Healing happens not in intensity, but in consistency. And something shifts, something powerful. Their body relaxes. Their mind stops bracing. Their walls lower on their own. They begin to trust connection, not fear it. When a fearful avoidant finally experiences safe connection, they learn the truth that changes everything. Love isn't threatening when it's steady. Safety isn't suffocating when it's gentle. Connection isn't dangerous when it makes room for them to breathe. Rewriting the story is the moment a fearful avoidant finally stops living out old chapters that were never theirs to begin with. For most of their life, they clung to one survival rule: distance keeps me safe. But distance never protected them. It didn't prevent heartbreak, calm anxiety, or keep anyone consistent, loyal, or loving. Instead, distance kept them lonely, misunderstood, and trapped in the very pain they were trying to escape. Eventually, often after losing someone who truly felt different, a quiet but powerful realization breaks through. Avoidance didn't save them, it only stopped them from ever feeling chosen. And that's when the story begins to shift. Not through dramatic transformations, but through small, brave acts that feel terrifying at first. Answering instead of pulling back, expressing instead of overthinking, staying instead of running, admitting the fear instead of hiding it. Fearful avoidants don't heal by becoming fearless. They heal by becoming honest about their triggers, their needs, how hard closeness feels, and how deeply they want it anyway. The old story taught them that vulnerability equals danger. The new story teaches them that vulnerability equals clarity. When they speak instead of vanish, ask instead of assume, and let someone see what's behind the armor, they discover something they never expected. Good people don't punish emotional truth. They respond to it. They offer reassurance, steadiness, and a kind of presence that doesn't run from the parts others once rejected. Slowly, a new internal narrative forms. Maybe closeness isn't a trap. Maybe expressing themselves won't make someone leave. Maybe love doesn't have to hurt. Every tiny act of vulnerability becomes a sentence rewritten in the old script, and eventually the entire story becomes different. Panic softens into awareness, withdrawal becomes communication, and predict and protect transforms into trust and progress. The fearful avoidant finally sees the real danger. It wasn't connection, it was living inside a story that convinced them they weren't safe to love. And rewriting that story doesn't happen in one grand moment. It happens in dozens of small ones. Breathing instead of shutting down, staying in the conversation instead of disappearing, letting someone hold space for them without bracing for pain. Realizing that their past shaped them but doesn't have to define their future relationships. This becomes the turning point, the moment they stop surviving love and start learning how to receive it. Healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means becoming the version of themselves who never had the chance to exist. The one who isn't ruled by fear, but guided by truth. And that is where the real story finally begins to change. Healing for a fearful avoidant doesn't come from never getting triggered again. It comes from what they do after the trigger hits. For most of their life, their reflex has been simple. Feel fear, create distance, disappear until the emotion dies down. Running feels safer than explaining. Silence feels easier than vulnerability. Retreating feels like control. But every time they run, the wound stays open. Every time they withdraw, the pattern repeats. Every time they punish themselves with isolation, the old story gains power again. The breakthrough happens when they try something new, something uncomfortable, unnatural, and completely opposite to their instinct. They repair instead of run. And this doesn't mean they suddenly become emotionally fluent or magically calm during conflict. It means they do one tiny thing differently. When they feel the urge to shut down, they pause. Not forever, just long enough to breathe through the panic, to notice the old survival script activating again. When their chest tightens, when their mind spirals into worst case scenarios, when their fear screams, protect yourself, they stop, even for a moment, and observe the fear instead of obeying it. Then comes the hardest part. They communicate the fear, not perfectly, not eloquently, not with flawless emotional awareness. Sometimes it comes out messy. I'm overwhelmed. I need a minute, but I'm not leaving. This brought up old stuff for me. I'm scared you'll leave if I say the wrong thing. I want to stay connected, but I don't know how. These small sentences heal wounds that years of silence kept alive because communication doesn't erase the fear, that redirects it. It takes the energy that once fueled avoidance and uses it to create connection instead. And the real magic happens when they return. When the fearful avoidant comes back after calming down, when they re-engage instead of letting distance widen, when they check in, reopen the conversation, or simply show presence again, they teach their nervous system something revolutionary. I can repair, I can stay. I don't have to run to feel safe. Every time they do this, the attachment wound closes a little more because repair builds trust, both in the relationship and within themselves. It shows them that conflict doesn't equal abandonment, that discomfort doesn't equal danger, that expressing needs won't push someone away, that returning doesn't mean losing power. And slowly, a new pattern replaces the old one. Triggers become conversations. Distance becomes understanding. Fear becomes vulnerability. Avoidance becomes connection. This is how a fearful avoidant transforms, not instantly, not perfectly, but consistently. Not by eliminating their fears, but by facing them with just a little more courage each time. Repair becomes their new form of self-protection. Staying becomes their new strength. And connection becomes something they can finally trust. Not because it was always safe, but because they learned how to remain present long enough to experience the safety they never had before. This is the moment the healing becomes real.